What's happening? It is the 13th of August, and you're watching Liam's Minute Shop. It's like 5:15 in the afternoon. It's hot out. It's 26 degrees out. I just got off work. I'm out of breath and I'm sweating. Once I've done this, I'm gonna lift some weights. I've kind of been slacking off the weights, to be fair. I've just been hitting the punching bag and skipping the rope. You know, I need to get back onto the weights. It's been like, I don't know, maybe 4 days since I last did them. But yeah, enjoy the show. So in the last episode, I was talking about a little bit about my upbringing, sort of, and like my time at school, as well as a little bit of like my football experience. But today I wanted to go through like my first job, because my first job was actually kind of sick. I was a kitchen assistant. So basically, I worked on the pass, I did all the dishes, and occasionally I would get up to the actual cooking side and cook some shit. You know, pretty basic shit though, just taking shit in and out of the oven, dropping the fries, taking them up whenever they were ready. You know, getting the salads ready in the morning. It was a good job, and it paid. Well, minimum wage over here is pretty good. It's not like England where it's, you know, minimum wage is pretty much poverty. The people that worked there were a right crack up. You had the big G. The way this kitchen worked, it wasn't like chef, sous chef, and then everyone else, like sauce cook, fish cook, meats, fucking whatever, soups. There was just the head chef. There was the second chef, who I guess you could call sous chef, and then there was me. And that was the entire team. Fucking, it was just 3 people to this kitchen. It was all pub feed. So, you know, fresh pies, fresh soups, like freshly battered cod, beer batter and all, like made by the beer even being by the brewery that owns the actual pub. I grew fucking so much in that job, because just before that I was in, well, obviously I left year 11 GCSEs, and you know, you don't really have life experience in GCSEs because you're only 16 and all you know is school. So after that I left, or no, I went to the college that was around here. I went for media studies, but I left early. It was a shit course. I remember the first fucking lesson we had in the graphic design section. The first question was, so do you guys know what layers are in Photoshop? Oh man, what the fuck am I doing here? I'm just wasting my time. So I left there. I had some other reasons too, and so like my mental health was in the fucking shitter. It was in the sewers and fucking further along. And so, you know, I eventually like cleaned up my act. Fucking, my parents were pressuring me to get a job because I was doing nothing in the house. Particularly after I had broken up with my then girlfriend. I had nothing to do, no one to go hang out with, because I had pretty much like fobbed off everyone from secondary school. I lost contact with everyone, I want to say. But the people there were a right crack up. The second chef in particular, he like took me in under his wing, sort of. He was like he sort of acted as a mentor into like my transition between being a little boy into, you know, when I left this kitchen, I went to move to Newcastle. So it's like my little transition from being a boy to trying to be a man, you know? He was the biggest pothead I ever fucking knew. He smoked so much fucking weed. I remember he would always say that after work he would come home and he called them buckets. So I'm guessing what he did was he filled a bucket and it was like I want to say it was like a gravity bong. So he'd fill up a bucket filled with weed and then put it in water and then fucking do some shit and get absolutely toasted. And at that time he was living with his brother and his brother's girlfriend. And so like they just fucking did whatever they wanted. They just smoked, played video games, and worked at pubs, which I respect, but at his age it was kind of sad. I hate to say it because he's such a legend, but you know, he introduced me to the whole bamboo rolling mat. It's like a sort of sushi rolling mat. I'll show you. So you can get these from like any smoke shop near you where you can buy like raw papers and shit. There's this fucker. This is like the key to. It's like a party trick at some places, man. Fucking in Newcastle at least, I'd bring this with me, with a few papers, and I'd roll like, because you set out your paper, you put your weed in there, you do that once, and then it's out, and it looks like a fucking cigarette as well. It's such a clean, nice joint, and because it's so quick, and no one knows how to roll, it's like, holy shit, man, whoa! He was the dude that introduced me to that shit, because he had one of these at work to roll his cigarettes. He said it was because he fucked up his hands, so it like hurt to roll a normal one. But after using this so many times, I cannot go back to just regular rolling. It's so shit rolling like that, and this is just so nice and clean. We had 2 shifts in one day, because there was no reason for the kitchen to be open in like from 2 till 5, because everyone was either back at work or just drinking some beers. There was no point having the kitchen open. And so like there was a few times when I like said, oh man, I don't have any weed for tonight. And so he'd come in with like a 20 bag, and he was a legend. He was such a G. The Big Don, the head chef, he was a very stern character. He was from like North Africa, and his story was he had been in the kitchen industry for like 20 years, probably like 22 by now. And the way he came about was, he came from his country in North Africa. He went to London, and he learned everything in London. He learned like all like the honor of being in the kitchen, how to treat kitchen staff properly. Like feeding everyone just before, kitchen opens for the public. He brought that over, and after that, there hasn't been a kitchen that I've worked at that does that. He had this green fedora that he always wore, and he'd come in and he'd get his espresso, and he'd roll a cigarette. He used to smoke cigarettes in one fucking hit, I swear to God. He'd roll up his cigarette, he'd go outside for like 5 seconds, and he'd come back, and a waft of fucking tobacco air would come in. It fucking stunk. But that's just who he was. He was a very stressed out kind of guy. Always. So like whenever he had the chance, he was out for a cigarette. And it's fair enough. The pay for head chefs around here, at least in the pubs, it isn't the best. And I think his wife was suffering from cancer at this time, so he had a lot to sort out. like a lot to deal with, and at the same time as all of that, he was trying to get a one of the estate houses, because over here you can, I think they call it like social housing in America. Over here you can actually own your estate house. You can like own a percentage of it. And so he was trying his absolute fucking hardest to get that sorted. And he was on a salary rather than like just hourly pay. So no matter what he did, no matter how many hours he did, he always got the same fixed pay, which was fucked because he'd have to work so much overtime, you know. But at the end of the day, it was his job. Whenever everyone else was on breaks, he pretty much just stayed and took care of the kitchen, prepped everything over the break. You know, that's if there was like a lot to do. He would obviously go on his breaks when he could, but he was a legend. Because you know, he was Arabic and Muslim Arabic, so he'd I remember on the evening shifts, I'd come in and he'd be on like FaceTime with one of his Arabic buddies, and he every weekend he'd plan like he played poker with the boys, and he'd drink and he'd smoke, and you know, that was like his like haven. You know, it was actually quite nice listening into him having his conversations over the phone, because he's a good character. You can tell that he's outside of work, he'd be a good hang. I really wish I got to hang out with him at some point, but I guess I can go back because I've moved back to the island now, and I can just go to that pub, say like, "Yo, want to go out for drinks?" Some shit like that. But both of the dudes are like twice my age, so I don't know how that would go. But fucking, he was so cool. I learned a lot from him, particularly like about hard work, like a few little skills here and there. There was this trick that he did with eggs. He'd because there would be like spare veggie lasagna mix, so it's pretty much just like ratatouille with tomato sauce. And so this one time he just put it in a saucepan, and then he'd crack eggs over it and just leave it there, and so they'd poach in the sauce. And he'd put like salt and pepper over it. So fucking good, man. So good. And he'd get the egg just perfect, so like the yolk was runny still. He was a legend. And I remember he made this like this hummus quiche, I want to say, like a very traditional North African dish, and he gave it to me, and I was like, fucking hell, this is actually really good, considering fucking everyone else had tried it and they like, what is this? Because I don't know how to describe it. It's literally just like some, I don't know how he made it, but you know, it was kind of bland, but like you put some salt on it, and he'd put some spices on it. It was so good. But like the texture, I guess, is what put people off, because it was like a soft mush in a quiche, pretty much. And he even showed us how to like properly make couscous, like the real way to make couscous, where like you put it in a bowl, you pour hot water on it, and like he'd wrap it with he'd either put a towel over it or he'd wrap it with cling film. He did it the super old school way, and it was fucking sick. And he'd always talk about his childhood, because, you know, being so far from home, I did the same in Newcastle. I'd always talk about here when I was in Newcastle. And he'd say like, in that part they grew like tomatoes, and so they'd stick them in the fridge, and he'd bite into a tomato, and they were so cold, but like so juicy that the juice would squirt out everywhere. And fucking, he looked after us. He was like a fucking second father, pretty much at that period. He was so cool, and I especially appreciated him when like this one time he went off for holiday, because he celebrates Ramadan, and so oh my days, he went through the whole of Ramadan at work, and so you know a hot fucking kitchen. It's like the start of summer, so it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter throughout Ramadan, and like he'd make us all fucking sandwiches that were packed with just like he'd make little kebabs, lamb kebabs, and he'd maybe some hummus in there, whatever fucking he could find, he'd throw into it. And he made all three of us these sandwiches to take home. And he'd eat it on the bus on the way back home, because we worked 10 till 8. And so throughout that whole time, oh my days, I can't imagine how that would have been like. That would have been fucked. But, after Ramadan, he took some time off to spend time with his kids and his wife, properly celebrate the end of Ramadan with them. Because is that how Ramadan works? Like the end of once Ramadan's finished, then there's like a whole nother celebration, I think, or at least that's what he made out to be. But fucking, we had to replace him, of course, for that time being. So we had this like, substitute teachers in school, and how they're always twats. We had the fucking equivalent of that in this like pub branch, this fucking geezer. Holy shit. And he really takes the cake on the word geezer. Fucking, you think of geezer and it's this dude. Like an old fucking fart, musty as shit, and a right twat. But then at the end of the day, he'd be like buddy with you. He's like, hey, good work, lads. But fucking hell. He was like, how like Gordon Ramsay, he's sort of a dickhead to everyone, but at the end of the day, it's so everyone performs their absolute best. This dude was just a twat for the sake of being a twat. I swear to God. There was no like, fucking, yeah. The way this dude looked as well. He was a right character. He had one eye like squiffed off. He was short as fuck, and he was a pudgy fella. So like, he was the least intimidating person in the world. At retail jobs, maybe you work at McDonald's or something like that. There's the manager who's been there for like 10 or so years, and it's like, how can you do this for 10 years? It's just kind of sad. But this dude takes the cake, because he had been in the kitchens for 40 fucking years. He had been there since like the late 70s, I want to say. And he was in his 60s. He was supposed to be like retired, but that just meant that he didn't work evening shifts. He only worked morning shifts. Oh man. And so like, he told me this story of how when he was just getting started out in the kitchens, his chef made him like chop up a load of parsley, like shed loads, and then the head chef came to him and fucking, he said, nah, that's not fine enough, binned it. Instead of just like getting him to chop it up more. And so, this dude's like, what the fuck, I could have just kept chopping. And so the head chef goes, "Come with me." He goes around and like goes past the walk-in fridge, and he opens up this cupboard, and it's filled with parsley. And the head chef of this place tells him like, "Fucking do all this, mate." And I don't want to see a single bit that's not fine enough. It's like, Jesus, no wonder he's such a, you know. In the evening shift, he was a decent fella, because he just didn't want to be there, and he knew that evenings were kind of quiet, and so, you know, if you've ever worked in a kitchen, you know how it is with like when kitchen staff don't want to do anything, and then a check comes up, everyone's like, "Oh, what the fuck, man." Fuck you, like, screaming at the check machine, insulting the people downstairs eating. Oh, man. Like, the environment of working in there, whilst it was hard work, the work ethic just wasn't there. Because people, you know, at a certain point in the day, you just want to go home and have a smoke. You know, have a little bit of green, or have a drink. Particularly kitchen staff. Kitchen staff are either drunks or potheads, you know, or both. Both works. Yeah, that was my first job. It was a fucking nuts job. I stayed there for like a year. I learnt a lot just being there for a year. It set me up to. I had my eye out for, you know, what to look for in Newcastle, especially my second kitchen job. I worked there for a month because, you know, this first kitchen job, it was a bistro. So it's like fresh pies, fresh soups, fresh, hardly anything frozen. And then this second kitchen I worked at, everything, and I mean absolutely everything, was frozen. And it was deep fat fryer, grill, maybe a frying pan. Like, the eggs were kind of fresh, you could say. The salad was kind of fresh there. But, you know, I got caught being stoned and got fired from that job. But I didn't care. But yeah, thanks for coming along. This has been Liam's Minute Shop. Don't forget to subscribe. Tell me what your first job was, and fucking tell me a funny story. Maybe tell me about one of the characters there. And tune in for the next episode. Fucking howdy.